The sun hung high in the sky, casting a golden glow over Willow Grove Park, where the air was alive with the promise of spring. A gentle breeze rustled through the cherry blossom trees, their delicate pink petals drifting lazily to the ground, filling the afternoon with a faint sweetness. Children's laughter rang out like music, bouncing off the wooden beams of the playground. Among them was 8-year-old Sophia Anderson, her dark braids swinging wildly as she dashed across the wood chip-covered ground. Her pink sneakers kicked up tiny clouds of dust with every step, her small frame weaving expertly between the swing sets. She was a blur of motion, her heart pounding with the thrill of the chase, her giggles spilling out as she dodged her friend's outstretched hands. "Catch me if you can," Sophia shouted, her voice bright with glee as she darted past the monkey bars, her chest heaved with exhilaration, her brown eyes sparkling under the sunlight. Zoe, her blonde ponytail whipping behind her like a flag, lunged forward, fingers brushing the edge of Sophia's sleeve. "Oh, you're mine this time," Zoe called, her tone playful but determined. Her cheeks flushed pink from the effort. Close behind was Luke, his faded Superman t-shirt clinging to his sweaty back, the once vivid red and blue dulled by countless spins in the washing machine. "I'm coming for you first, Sophia," he yelled, his sneakers slapping the ground as he picked up speed, his lanky legs pumping furiously. The three of them zigzagged through the playground, their faces glowing with the pure, unfiltered joy of childhood. They'd played this game 100 times before, the timeless dance of pursuit and escape always collapsing in a heap of breathless laughter. When the sun began to dip low, the park buzzed with life around them. Birds chirped from the treetops, their songs weaving into the creak of rusty swing chains swaying in the breeze. Other kids shouted and scampered nearby, their voices blending into a symphony of carefree delight. For Sophia, Zoe, and Luke, this was their sanctuary, a place where the world made sense, where rules were simple, and the only consequence was a scraped knee or a triumphant tag. Sophia felt invincible here, her small body buzzing with energy as she spun around a slide, her laughter echoing across the open space. But not far away, Officer Julia Hart was making her way along her patrol route, her polished black boots clicking rhythmically against the cracked sidewalk. The sun glinted off her badge, a sharp contrast to the dark blue of her uniform, which hugged her frame with crisp precision. She moved with the steady gait of someone accustomed to authority, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the world around her like a hawk. As she neared the park, her gaze settled on the children playing, drawn irresistibly to Sophia's swift, darting figure. Something about the girl's speed, her unrestrained energy, prickled at Julia's nerves. Her shoulders stiffened, a faint tension creeping into her frame as she watched Sophia dodge Zoe with a gleeful squeal. Julia's hand drifted to her belt, her fingers brushing the cool metal of her handcuffs, a habit born from years of instinct. She stood there for a moment, her lips pressing into a thin line, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite name. Safety concerns, vague reports of trouble in the area, a need to assert control. Then, with a sharp breath, she made up her mind. Her boots crunched loudly against the wood chips as she strode into the park, her shadow stretching long and dark across the playground, cutting through the warmth of the day like a blade. The children didn't notice her at first, too caught up in their game. But Sophia's laughter faltered when a firm hand suddenly clamped around her arm. In one swift, forceful motion, Officer Hart yanked her to a stop, the grip so tight it made Sophia stumble, her sneakers skidding against the ground. Pain shot through her arm, and she looked up, wide-eyed, into the officer's stern face. "What do you think you're doing?" Julia demanded, her voice sharp and unyielding, her fingers digging into Sophia's skin hard enough to leave pale marks against her brown complexion. Confusion crashed over Sophia like a wave, drowning out the joy she'd felt just seconds before. Her breath hitched, her small chest tightening as fear replaced exhilaration. "We're just playing tag," she stammered, her voice trembling, barely above a whisper. She searched Julia's face for some hint of understanding, but found only cold resolve staring back at her. Zoe skidded to a halt a few feet away, her ponytail bouncing as she took in the scene, her blue eyes widening with panic. "Officer, wait!" she cried, rushing forward, her hands outstretched as if she could pull Sophia back by sheer will. "She's our friend, Sophia. We've known her forever." Her voice cracked, desperation seeping into every word. Luke stumbled up beside her, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his forehead and staining his Superman shirt a darker shade. "Yeah, we're all playing together," he added, his tone a mix of defiance and distress. "She didn't do anything wrong, he swear." His brown eyes darted between Sophia and the officer, his fists clenching at his sides as he tried to make sense of the sudden chaos. He'd always seen himself as the hero in their little trio, but now he felt powerless, his cape nowhere in sight. But Officer Hart didn't waver. Her jaw tightened, her expression carved from stone as she began tugging Sophia toward the park entrance. "I'm concerned about safety here," she said, her voice clipped and edged with something unyielding. "There've been incidents in the area." It was an excuse, flimsy and vague, but she delivered it with such conviction that it silenced the children's protests for a heartbeat. Sophia's sneakers dragged against the wood chips, her small body resisting instinctively even as tears welled up in her eyes. "Please," she whimpered, her voice breaking as the first drops spilled down her cheeks, soaking into the collar of her favorite pink t-shirt. "I was just playing with my friends. We always play here every day after school." Her pleas hung in the air, fragile and unanswered, as Julia's grip remained unrelenting. "Stop crying and come with me," Officer Hart snapped, her patience thinning as she marched Sophia toward the squad car parked at the curb. The vehicle's white paint gleamed in the sunlight, a stark, imposing presence against the soft colors of the park. Zoe and Luke stood frozen, their mouths agape, tears mirroring Sophia's as they watched their friend being pulled away. The world they'd known their safe, predictable world had shattered in an instant. They exchanged a frantic glance, a silent agreement passing between them, before they turned and bolted, their sneakers pounding the pavement as they raced toward Sophia's house. Their lungs burned, their legs ached, but they didn't stop, driven by a desperate need to fix this nightmare. Inside the squad car, Sophia sank into the back seat, her small frame trembling with sobs. The door slammed shut with a sound like thunder, reverberating through her bones and sealing her in this strange, terrifying reality. Through the tinted window, she caught a fleeting glimpse of the playground swings still swaying gently, the cherry blossoms drifting in the breeze, the life she'd been ripped from. Her hands twisted in her lap, her braids falling into her face as she tried to understand why this was happening. She'd been happy, free, just moments ago. Now she was alone, the leather seat cold against her legs, the air thick with the sterile scent of the car. Her mind spun with questions she couldn't answer, her heart aching with a fear she'd never known. Meanwhile, Zoe and Luke tore down Willow Lane, the afternoon heat pressing against their skin as they pushed their bodies to the limit. Sweat stung their eyes, blurring their vision, but they didn't dare slow down. The neat rows of houses blurred past them, the sidewalk a relentless gray ribbon beneath their feet. When they finally reached Sophia's homey, a tidy two-story house with white siding and blue shutter shows, shaking hand jabbed at the doorbell again and again, the chime ringing out in a frantic staccato. Luke doubled over beside her, hands on his knees, gasping for air, his Superman shirt soaked through. The door swung open, and there stood Chief Michael Anderson, his tall, broad figure filling the frame. He wore a navy polo shirt and khakis, his weakened casualness a stark contrast to the storm brewing in his dark eyes. The shadows of the porch deepened, the lines of concern etched into his face, as he took in the sight of the panting, tear-streaked children. "What's wrong?" he asked, his deep voice steady, but laced with an undercurrent of worry. He stepped forward, his large hand reaching out to steady Zoe, who swayed slightly from exhaustion, her fingers gripping the porch railing for support. "Mr. Anderson," Zoe blurted, her words tripping over each other in a rush. The police officer took Sophia. Her voice broke, tears streaming down her flushed cheeks, leaving salty trails on her skin. Luke nodded vigorously, still catching his breath, his sweaty hair sticking up in wild spikes. "We were just playing tag. She didn't do anything wrong, I swear," he insisted, his fists balling up again as he relived the moment. "She grabbed her arm," Zoe added, her voice trembling with indignation. "And she wouldn't listen when we told her we're friends. She just wouldn't listen at all. Chief Anderson's face darkened, a shadow passing over his features as the weight of their words settled in. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching faintly, and his hands curled into fists for a brief, fleeting moment before he forced them to relax. Inside, his mind churned with a storm of emotions: anger at the injustice, fear for his little girl, and a cold, simmering rage at the thought of someone laying hands on her. But years of police training held him steady, his voice calm as he spoke. "You did the right thing coming to me," he assured them, his tone firm yet warm. A lifeline for the shaken children. He reached for his car keys on the hook by the door, the metal jangling softly in his steady grip. "Everything's going to be okay. Go home now, he'll handle this." His words were a promise, a vow etched in steel. He strode to his car with purpose, his movements controlled despite the fury boiling beneath the surface. The engine roared to life, a deep growl that matched the tension in his chest, and he pulled out of the driveway with the precision of a man who'd faced crises before. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, every muscle in his body coiled with resolve. He was heading to Willow Grove Park, to his daughter, to the officer who dared to overstep. And as he drove, the lesson of this moment crystallized in his mind. Justice wasn't just a badge or a uniform, it was a line that, when crossed, demanded accountability. Officer Hart had abused her power, and the consequences were about to unravel in ways she couldn't fathom, shaking the foundations of the force she served. For Sophia carried a truth tied to her father's authority, a hidden weight that would turn this fleeting act of arrogance into a reckoning. None of them could escape. The crunch of gravel beneath Chief Anderson's boots echoed in his ears as he stepped out of his car, each step reverberating with a deliberate rhythm that matched the pounding of his heart. Just a few minutes ago, he'd been at home, the Sunday afternoon sun filtering lazily through his kitchen window, when the frantic knocks of neighborhood kids had shattered the calm. Now, as his eyes locked onto the squad car parked crookedly near the playground's edge, a wave of dread crashed over him. There, in the back seat, was his 8-year-old daughter, Sophia, her tiny frame hunched forward, her tear-streaked cheeks pressed against the glass, her small hands splayed against the window, fingers trembling as if reaching for him through the barrier. The sight pierced him like a shard of ice, lodging deep in his chest, but he forced his face into a mask of steel resolve. He couldn't afford to crumble, not yet. The playground stretched out before him, its vibrant colors dulled by the tension hanging thick in the air. The swing swayed gently in the breeze, abandoned mid-flight, and the slide stood empty, its bright red surface glinting mockingly under the harsh afternoon sun. Beyond the squad car, Officer Julia Hart stood scribbling furiously in her notebook, her posture rigid with the kind of detached professionalism that came with years on the force. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, accentuating the sharp lines of her face. But as Chief Anderson's shadow fell across her, she froze. The sound of his boots grinding into the gravel snapped her head up, and for a fleeting moment, her pen hovered mid-sentence. Her hazel eyes widened, flickering with recognition, then shock, as they met the towering figure of her superior striding toward her. The notebook slipped slightly in her grasp, her fingers tightening around it as if it were a lifeline. The sun cast jagged shadows across her features, deepening the creases of unease that now etched her brow. "Chief Anderson," she stammered, her voice cracking like thin ice underfoot. Didn't the words faltered, dying in her throat as she instinctively took a step back, her boots scuffing the dirt. Chief Anderson's gaze shifted, slow and deliberate, from the officer to the squad car where Sophia sat trapped. His daughter's wide, frightened eyes met his, and the fury that surged within him was a living thing, clawing at his ribs, begging for release. Yet beneath it simmered a colder, sharper emotion, his belief that one of his own could do this. He squared his shoulders, his broad frame seeming to expand as he drew himself up to his full height, every inch radiating the authority of a man who was both a father and the police chief. The air between them crackled, heavy with unspoken accusations. "Officer Hart," he said, his voice low and measured, each syllable a hammer striking stone. "I need you to explain to Merritt Noe my 8-year-old daughter is sitting in the back of your squad car." Julia Hart's face drained of color, the blood fleeing her cheeks as the weight of his words settled over her like a suffocating fog. Her mouth opened, then closed, her lips trembling as she searched for an answer that wouldn't come. The notebook slipped further in her shaking hands, tumbling to the ground with a soft thud, its pages fluttering in the breeze like the frantic wings of a trapped bird. She stood there, exposed and vulnerable, pinned beneath the dual gaze of a grieving father and an outraged superior. Round them, the park had begun to stir. A couple pushing a stroller along the winding path froze mid-step, their faces tightening with unease as they glanced toward the unfolding scene. Two elderly men perched on a weathered bench nearby leaned forward, their heads tilted, ears straining to catch every word. A woman clutching a grocery bag paused near the playground's edge, her lips pursed in silent judgment, while a teenage boy on a bicycle circled slowly, his phone raised, the faint click of a recording underscoring the growing hum of whispers. Chief Anderson's eyes bore into Officer Hart, unrelenting. "I'm waiting," he pressed, his tone sharpening as he took a step closer. "What possible reason could you have for putting my daughter in handcuffs?" The word handcuffs landed like a blow, and Julia flinched visibly, her fingers fumbling with the edge of her utility belt. She shifted her weight, her boots scuffing the dirt again as she struggled to meet his gaze. "Sir," she began, her voice small and unsteady. It was following standard protocol. There appeared to be a situation that required intervention. Her words sounded hollow even to her own ears, a rehearsed line crumbling under scrutiny. A situation. Chief Anderson's voice took on a dangerous edge, low and cutting, as he gestured toward the playground behind her. The laughter of children echoed faintly in the distance, a cruel contrast to the scene unfolding here. What situation, exactly? Children playing in a park on a Sunday afternoon. His eyes narrowed, glinting with barely restrained anger. "I was concerned about the safety of the other children," Julia replied, her voice shrinking further, barely above a whisper. She wiped a bead of sweat from her forehead, her hand trembling as she did so. It seemed like what? He cut in, his tone slicing through her excuse like a blade. He took another step forward, his presence towering over her, unyielding. "What exactly did you see that made you think an 8-year-old girl playing tag with her friends was a threat?" Julia's breath hitched, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she shifted uncomfortably. The sweat on her brow glistened in the sunlight, a testament to the pressure bearing down on her. "Sir, there were safety concerns," she mumbled, her words faltering as she glanced at the ground, unable to hold his gaze. "Safety concerns?" Chief Anderson's laugh was sharp and bitter, devoid of any warmth, echoing across the playground like a gunshot. "Let me ask you something, Officer Hart." He paused, letting the silence stretch taut between them, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her shrink. "Would you have had these same safety concerns if my daughter was white?" The question hung in the air, heavy and ominous, like a storm cloud ready to burst. Julia's mouth opened, then snapped shut, her face flushing a deep crimson as she struggled to respond. Her eyes darted to the growing crowd, more onlookers now, their murmurs rising like a tide. The teenage boy's phone remained trained on her, capturing every agonizing second, while the woman with the groceries shook her head slowly, her disapproval palpable. "If it's not," Julia stammered, her voice breaking as she tried to claw her way out of the hole she dug. "Not what?" Chief Anderson snapped, his tone hardening into steel. "Not what you meant, not what you were thinking." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Because from where I'm standing, you saw a black child playing with white children and immediately assumed the worst. Am I wrong?" The accusation landed like a thunderclap, and Julia's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of her. She stared at her boots, the scuffed leather suddenly the most fascinating thing in the world, as the weight of her actions pressed down on her like a physical force. Chief Anderson drew a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as he fought to keep his composure. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less intense, each word laced with the pain of a father and the authority of a leader. "You had no right to put your hands on my daughter," he said, his gaze unwavering. "No right to traumatize a child who was doing nothing wrong except being herself in a public park." Julia stood frozen, her head bowed, the truth of his words washing over her like a tidal wave. She had no defense, no justification that could erase the image of Sophia's tearful face behind that glass. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant giggles of children and the rustle of leaves in the breeze, until Chief Anderson's voice cut through it once more. "I'm still waiting, Officer Hart. Why exactly did you feel it necessary to place my daughter in custody?" Her hands fumbled with the notebook she'd retrieved from the ground, her fingers trembling as she clutched it to her chest like a shield. "Sir, Tu was conducting a routine patrol," she began, her voice quivering. "When I observed Edwin, I noticed," she faltered, her words tripping over themselves. "Noticed what, exactly?" Chief Anderson's tone was a blade, sharp and unyielding. As he crossed his arms over his chest, Julia straightened her shoulders, a desperate attempt to reclaim some semblance of dignity. "I was following standard protocol, sir. I observed what appeared to be a potentially threatening situation and acted to ensure the safety of the other children." "Threatening situation," he gestured toward the playground again, his hands sweeping wide to encompass the swings, the slide, the open grassy field where Sophia had been playing moments before this nightmare began. "You mean my 8-year-old daughter playing tag with her friends? Those same friends who ran to my house in tears because you traumatized their playmate?" His voice rose slightly, the raw edge of a father's anguish bleeding through his control. Julia flinched again, her eyes darting to the squad car where Sophia still sat, her small form a silent accusation. "Sir, I had concerns about," she started, but he cut her off, his patience fraying. "Please, Officer Hart," he said, his voice rising now, sharp with exasperation. "Explain to me how a small child playing with her friends could possibly appear threatening to you. I'm very interested in understanding your reasoning here." Julia shifted her weight again, her boots grinding into the gravel as she searched for an answer. That wouldn't sound as flimsy as it felt. "There were safety concerns," she repeated, her voice barely audible, a broken record stuck on a lie she couldn't sustain. "Safety concerns," he echoed, his tone dripping with disdain as he took another step closer, his shadow swallowing hers. "Or was it something else, Officer Hart? Would you have had the same safety concerns if my daughter had been white?" The question struck again, a relentless hammer driving the point home. Julia's mouth worked soundlessly, her face a mask of panic and shame as the crowd's murmurs grew louder, their judgment a tangible weight pressing against her. "Tu was just trying to," she began, her voice trailing off into nothing. "Trying to what?" Chief Anderson pressed, his eyes blazing. "Would you have grabbed a white child's arm and dragged them to your squad car? Would you have ignored their friends telling you they were all playing together?" Julia's face burned red, her gaze dropping to the ground once more, unable to meet the fire in his eyes. He took a deep breath, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet that somehow carried more weight than his earlier sharpness. "You should never have laid a hand on my daughter, Officer Hart." She stood there, speechless, the weight of her mistake a crushing force on her slumped shoulders. Her hands trembled visibly as she fumbled with the keys at her belt, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. With a shaky breath, she stepped toward the squad car, unlocking the door with a click that seemed to echo in the stillness. Sophia stumbled out, her small frame trembling as she ran to her father, burying her face in his side. "I'm so sorry," Julia stammered, her voice thick with unshed tears as she watched the reunion. "I made a terrible mistake. I should never have." Her words broke off, choked by the emotion swelling in her throat. Chief Anderson wrapped an arm around Sophia, his gaze never leaving Julia. The lesson here was clear, etched into the lines of his face and the steel of his voice. Justice demanded accountability, and the abuse of power carried consequences that rippled far beyond the moment. For Julia, the weight of that truth would linger, a shadow cast long and dark over her career and her conscience. As the playground slowly returned to life around them, the echoes of children's laughter a haunting reminder of what had been lost and what must never happen again. The moment Sophia tore herself away from the chaos, her small feet pounded the pavement in a frantic sprint toward her father. When she reached him, her arms locked around his waist with a desperate strength, her tear-soaked face pressing hard into the stiff fabric of his neatly pressed uniform. Her sobs were muffled against his chest, but the trembling of her fragile frame spoke louder than any sound. Chief Daniel Anderson instinctively dropped a hand to her head, his fingers threading gently through her tangled hair as if shielding her from the world. His other arm pulled her tightly against him, a fortress of protection, though his jaw clenched so hard it seemed it might shatter. Under the pressure of his barely restrained fury, kneeling down to meet her at eye level, his voice softened into a tender murmur. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" His eyes, sharp with worry, scanned her face for answers her tears couldn't give. Sophia managed a small nod, her cheek still pressed against him, but the quiet whimpers escaping her lips pierced straight through his heart, leaving an ache he couldn't ignore. Nearby, Officer Julia Hart stood frozen, her boots scuffing the ground as she took a shaky step forward, her hands twisted together nervously, fingers ringing as if trying to squeeze out the guilt that gnawed at her insides. "Chief Anderson, to truly apologize," she stammered, her voice cracking like brittle glass. Her wide eyes glistened with regret, but before she could finish, Daniel's head snapped toward her. His gaze was a storm of paternal rage, so fierce it silenced her mid-sentence, her words choking in her throat. "An apology doesn't undo the terror you've just carved into my daughter's soul, Officer Hart," he said, his tone cutting through the air like a blade. "This isn't just a mistake, it's a violation. We're here to shield people, not to break children's spirits. This kind of recklessness has no place in our ranks." Julia's shoulders sagged under the weight of his words, her face flushing a deep crimson as shame flooded through her. She nodded mutely, her lips trembling, knowing there was no defense for what she'd done. With one arm still wrapped securely round Sophia, Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket, his movements deliberate despite the fire simmering in his chest. "I'm calling your supervisor," he said, his voice low and resolute. "There have to be consequences for this. We can't just let it fade into nothing." As he dialed, Julia stood motionless under the golden glow of the afternoon sun, her silhouette a picture of defeat. Her eyes, red-rimmed and glistening, betrayed the depth of her remorse. But Daniel's focus remained locked on his daughter. Sophia's small body still quivered against him, and his free hand rested protectively on her shoulder as he spoke into the phone. "Captain Martinez, this is Chief Anderson. We've got a serious issue I need to address with you right now." His tone was steady, professional, but the undercurrent of anger was unmistakable as he recounted the incident how Officer Hart had, without cause, yanked his 8-year-old daughter from a carefree game of tag with her friends and shoved her into the back of a squad car. "Yes, that's right," he continued, his fingers absently smoothing Sophia's hair as he spoke. No explanation, no justification, just pure overreach. Through the phone's speaker, Captain Martinez's voice crackled with disbelief, his shock palpable even from a distance. "This is unacceptable, Daniel. I'll ensure disciplinary measures are taken immediately. We'll roll out mandatory sensitivity training across the department, no exceptions. Hart will face the consequences she's earned." Daniel nodded grimly as he listened, his expression carved from stone. "Good. I don't want another child to endure this," he replied before ending the call. Looking down at Sophia, he saw her tears had finally stopped, though her grip on his uniform remained tight, her knuckles white with fear. "It's okay, baby," he whispered, his hand gliding gently over her messy hair. "What happened today was wrong, deeply wrong, and it never should have touched you. But I swear, it won't happen again. Daddy's here, and I'll always keep you safe." Sophia's small head bobbed against him, her fingers still clinging to the fabric as he guided her toward their car. His steps were slow, purposeful, each one radiating a quiet resolve. Behind them, Julia lingered by her squad car, alone in the lengthening shadows. Her face was a mask of regret, etched with lines of shame as she watched them walk away. The weight of her actions pressed down on her like a physical force, her chest tight with the realization of how gravely she'd misjudged her authority. She'd crossed a line, and the consequences were hers to bear, a lesson in justice she'd never forget. As Daniel opened the car door for Sophia, the evening air turned crisp, a faint chill brushing against them. He felt her shiver beneath his arm and murmured, "It's all over now, sweetheart. We're going home." His hand reached for the handle, steady and sure. Then, a shrill ring sliced through the stillness of the parking lot, Julia fumbled with her phone, her hands trembling so violently she nearly dropped it. Answering the call, her face drained of color, turning as pale as the fading daylight. Her eyes widened in terror, and her free hand clutched at her chest, crumpling the pristine fabric of her uniform. "What do you mean he's not there?" she gasped, her voice rising into a frantic pitch. The phone slipped from her grasp, clattering harshly against the concrete as she crumpled, tears bursting forth in a torrent. "My baby liver he's missing," she sobbed, her hands flying to her face, her shoulders shaking with each ragged breath. "He's only 5. His teacher said he was at school, but after recess is gone. They can't find him anywhere." Daniel froze, his hands still on the car door, despite the anger still smoldering within him. The sight of Julia's collapse tugged at something deeper, his instincts as a father, his training as an officer. He turned back, his voice firm yet softened by a thread of compassion. "What's happening?" Julia struggled to speak through her sobs, black streaks of mascara trailing down her cheeks. "My son was at school, but now he's vanished. Ivasi was so awful to your daughter. And now my own child." Her voice broke entirely, her body swaying as grief and guilt collided within her. "I can't believe this is happening," she whispered, wrapping her arms around herself as if to hold her fracturing world together. Sophia stood silently beside her father, her wide eyes fixed on Julia. Despite the fear and hurt still lingering from earlier, she could feel the officer's pain radiating out, withdraw, real and shattering. Her small hand tightened around Daniel's, a quiet acknowledgement of the shared humanity in this moment. Daniel took a deep breath, the cool breeze ruffling his hair as he weighed his next move. After a heartbeat, he stepped toward Julia, his presence a steady anchor in her storm. "We're going to find him," he said, his voice ringing with the unshakable authority of years on the force. "I'm not leaving you to face this alone." Julia lifted her tear-streaked face, astonishment mingling with gratitude in her eyes. She wiped at her cheeks with shaking hands, stunned that this man was daughter she'd wronged so terribly would extend his strength to her now. The irony stung sharply. Her abuse of power had brought her to this vulnerable precipice, and yet here was justice tempered with mercy. Daniel placed a firm hand on her trembling shoulder. "Take a deep breath," he instructed, his tone calm and measured. "We need you clear-headed to help Oliver." Julia nodded, drawing in shaky gulps of air as her tears slowed. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words heavy with regret for both her breakdown and her earlier actions. He can't lose him." "I understand," Daniel replied, his composure unwavering. "But right now, we focus on finding your son. We'll start with the school, the nearby streets, anywhere he might have wandered." As he spoke, the weight of the day settled over them all. A father protecting his daughter, an officer facing the fallout of her choices, and a child's safety hanging in the balance. In this tangled web of pain and redemption, the lesson was clear: power misused could shatter lives, but justice, when wielded with purpose, could mend them too. The late afternoon sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. As Julia stood trembling in the parking lot, her chest heaving with uneven breaths, she swiped at her tear-streaked face with the back of her hand, the rawness of her skin stinging against the salty dampness. Her world had unraveled in mere hours, her 5-year-old son Oliver vanishing into the vast, uncaring sprawl of their small town. Yet, amidst the chaos of her spiraling fear, she found an unexpected anchor in Daniel, Chief Anderson of the local police. His voice, steady and low, cut through the haze of her panic as he spoke into his phone, issuing commands with the precision of a man accustomed to crisis. "This is Chief Anderson. We have a missing Childa Lever Hart, age 5. I need units dispatched immediately to the area around Lincoln Elementary." His eyes, sharp and focused, flicked toward her as he relayed details: shade, clothing, last known location, each word a lifeline she clung to desperately. Julia's knees felt weak, her heart pounding like a trapped bird against her ribs. But Daniel's swift action stirred something within her, a fragile flicker of hope. She watched him end the call, his broad shoulders squared with purpose, and her lips parted in a shaky whisper. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible, thick with emotion. Guilt gnawed at her insides, a bitter reminder of her past mistakes. "After what I did to Sophia, I don't deserve this. Her gaze darted to the young girl standing nearby, Daniel's daughter, whose wide, curious eyes followed every move her father made. Sophia's presence was a silent accusation, a living memory of the day Julia's reckless words had wounded her. Yet here they were, helping her despite it all. Daniel's response came firm and unwavering, his tone leaving no room for debate. This isn't about that right now. This is about finding your son. His words carried the weight of authority, but beneath them lay a quiet compassion that softened the edges of his stern demeanor. He turned his attention to the task ahead, his mind already spinning with strategy. Let's start with that playground you mentioned, Edmund Lincoln Elementary. Then we'll head to the park with the ducks. He loves those spots, right? Julia nodded, her breath steadying as she latched onto his plan. She glanced at Sophia again, the girl's small frame radiating a mix of concern and determination, and a wave of gratitude washed over her, to overwhelming the voice. As they moved toward Daniel's patrol car, the gravel crunching beneath their feet, Sophia tugged at her father's sleeve with a gentle but insistent pull. The fabric bunched in her tiny fist, her knuckles whitening with resolve. "Dad, I want to help find Oliver," she said, her voice clear and steady despite the faint tremble in her lower lip. The breeze rustled her hair, carrying the scent of pine and fading daylight, and Daniel paused, keys jangling softly in his hand. He crouched slightly, meeting her gaze, his brow furrowing with paternal worry. The shadows under her eyes told a story of their own, a day already heavy with strain, and he hesitated, torn between shielding her and honoring her courage. "Honey, are you sure? It's been a tough day already," he said, his voice softening, a rare crack in his composed exterior. Sophia shifted her weight, her sneakers scuffing the ground as she stood taller, her amber eyes blazing with purpose. "Please, Dad, you helped me when I was scared. I want to help Oliver too. He's probably so afraid, all by himself out there." Her words hung in the air, simple yet profound, and Daniel's chest tightened with pride. He saw it then, the same fierce kindness that had defined her mother, the same unyielding spirit mirrored in the set of her jaw. After a long moment, he nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture. "All right, but you tell me the second you want to go home, no questions asked, okay?" Sophia's face lit up with a small, determined smile as she climbed into the back seat, her hands folding neatly in her lap as Daniel secured her seatbelt with meticulous care. Julia, watching from a few steps away, felt fresh tears prick her eyes. She wiped them away with quivering fingers, her voice breaking as she spoke to the girl. "Thank you, Sophia. That's so kind of you, especially after everything." Her words faltered, heavy with the weight of her earlier betrayal. But Sophia met her gaze with a quiet understanding beyond her years. "Everyone needs help sometimes," she replied softly, her shoulders relaxing as if the act of offering forgiveness had lifted a burden from her too. The exchange lingered in the air, fragile and profound, a testament to the resilience of a child's heart. Their first stop was the playground behind Lincoln Elementary, a place Oliver adored. The rusted monkey bars glinted in the fading light, and the swings swayed gently in the breeze. Creaking on their chains, the three of them fanned out across the empty space, their voices rising in unison as they called his name. "Oliver, Oliver, where are you?" Julia's tone grew sharper with each shout, her desperation clawing its way to the surface. She clutched a photo of him, his gap-toothed grin frozen in time, and showed it to a lone jogger, who shook his head with a sympathetic frown. The long shadows stretched across the gravel paths, mocking their efforts, and the silence that answered their calls pressed heavily on Julia's chest. Next, they ventured to the small animal sanctuary 3 blocks away, a haven of rescued creatures Oliver could spend hours watching. The air smelled of hay and damp earth as they stepped inside, the soft scurrying of rabbits and hamsters filling the quiet. Julia's hands shook as she scanned the room, her eyes darting to every corner, every shadow. Sophia stayed close, her keen gaze sweeping the perimeter bushes along the fence, the gaps between the sheds missing nothing. "He loves the ducks best," Julia murmured, her voice cracking as they reached the pond outside. The water rippled gently, the ducks gliding in lazy circles, but there was no sign of her boy. With each empty location, her composure frayed further, her breaths coming in shallow gasps as tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "Where could he be?" she whispered, her voice a broken thread as they left the sanctuary behind. The sky had darkened to a bruised purple, the last light bleeding away. "We've checked all his favorite places." Daniel stepped closer, his hand resting on her shoulder with a steadying grip. "We'll find him," he said, his tone resolute, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of strain. "More officers are out there searching. We won't stop until he's safe. We'll turn this town upside down if we have to." His words were a lifeline, and Julia clung to them, nodding weakly as they returned to the car, the echo of their footsteps swallowed by the stillness. Back in the vehicle, Julia pressed her trembling hands to her face, her nails digging into her skin as she fought to quell the rising tide of panic. Daniel turned to her, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension radiating from his frame. "Let's think," he said gently. "Anywhere else Oliver might have gone in a detail, no matter how small." Sophia leaned forward from the back, her voice soft but firm. "It's okay, Miss Julia. Take your time. Sometimes it helps to close your eyes and picture it." Her encouragement was a balm, and Julia drew a ragged breath, forcing her mind to sift through the fog. "He loves the ice cream shop on Oak Street," she began, her hands twisting together until her knuckles blanched. "The one with the blue awning, and that little bell that jingles when you walk in. And the librarian never misses story time on Wednesdays. They read adventure books, and he'd sit there, eyes wide, hanging on every word." She paused, her voice trembling. "Oh, and Tommy's house on Maple Drive. He's got a friend there, Tommy, with a big treehouse in the backyard. Oliver's always talking about it." Daniel nodded, already shifting the car into gear. "That's good. Every detail helps. We'll check them all." The tires crunched over gravel as they pulled into Tommy's driveway, the house looming dark against the twilight. Julia stumbled out, her legs unsteady, and pounded on the door. Tommy's mother answered, her face creasing with concern as Julia's frantic explanation tumbled out. "I haven't seen him since last week," she said, her voice laced with regret, and Julia's shoulders slumped, defeat etching deeper lines into her face. At the ice cream shop, the bell chimed with hollow cheer as they stepped inside. The teenage clerk Mike, his name tag red-shifting awkwardly behind the counter. "No kids alone today," he muttered, tugging at his apron, and Julia's hope dimmed further, her calls growing hoarse with desperation. Through it all, the lesson loomed large: justice and consequence intertwined. Julia's past misuse of power, her careless words that had once hurt Sophia, now cast a long shadow over her pleas for help. Yet in this moment of reckoning, Daniel and Sophia chose mercy over retribution, their actions a powerful reminder that authority, wielded with compassion, could heal rather than harm. As the search stretched on, each empty lead a blow to Julia's fragile resolve. The weight of her choices pressed down, urging her to confront the cost of her actions and the grace she'd been granted in return. Julia gripped her phone with such ferocity that her fingers throbbed, the ache radiating up her wrists as she stood outside the pediatrician's office, where Oliver's cheerful laughter once echoed during checkups. Her heart pounded erratically, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs, as she dialed her sister. Then her neighbor Seach call, a desperate plea swallowed by the same hollow response. No one had seen him. The words stung like shards of glass, cutting deeper with every unanswered hope. Her voice, hoarse from shouting his name into the indifferent wind, trembled as she turned to Daniel, her eyes rimmed red from the tears she fought to contain. "I don't understand," she whispered, her breath barely pushing the words past her lips. "Where else could he be? I've looked everywhere he's ever known." The library loomed ahead, its sturdy brick walls, usually a sanctuary of warmth and stories, now casting a shadow that felt heavy and foreboding under the graying sky. Julia's steps faltered as they approached, her shoulders sagging beneath an invisible burden. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and dust, and the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Mrs. Peters, the elderly librarian with her wire-rimmed glasses perched low on her nose, leaned forward from behind the counter, her face softening with concern as Julia poured out their story. Her glasses caught the light, glinting like tiny beacons as she shook her head gently. "Oh, my dear, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice a soothing balm laced with regret. "I've been here since we opened the doors this morning, and I haven't seen little Oliver. But I'll keep my eyes peeled. It's like a sweet boy, always so quiet during story time." Sitting there with his big brown eyes fixed on every word, Julia nodded weakly, her chest tightening as they stepped back into the fading daylight, the librarian's kindness doing little to lift the dread coiling in her gut. Daniel rested a hand on her shoulder, his touch solid and unwavering, a tether to keep her from spiraling into the abyss of her fears. "We should circle back to some of the places we've checked," he suggested, his tone calm but resolute, honed by years of guiding others through chaos. "Kids move around sometimes. We could have just missed him. Let's stay methodic, keep our minds sharp." Julia's voice fractured as she tried to respond, the words snagging on a sob. But what if she couldn't finish, the unspoken terror choking her? Daniel cut in, his voice a gentle anchor. "Let's focus on what we can do right now. We'll keep searching until we find him. That's what counts." From the back seat, Sophia, her small frame barely visible over the headrest, stretched out a hand to touch Julia's arm. Her fingers were warm, a fleeting comfort against the cold dread consuming Julia. "My dad always says when things get tough, you take a deep breath and try again," Sophia offered, her voice bright with the innocence of youth. "Sometimes the answer's right there, waiting for you to see it." Julia forced a trembling smile, but the tears broke free anyway, carving wet paths down her cheeks. Shimmering in the dim light of the car, her hands shook uncontrollably as she fumbled with her phone, fingers clumsy as she scrolled through the gallery to a photo that now felt like a lifeline. "Here," she said, her voice quivering as she thrust the screen toward Daniel and Sophia. This was 3 days ago, before school. He was so proud of his new haircut. The image glowed with Oliver's radiant joy, a 5-year-old boy with coffee brown eyes that sparkled like sunlight on water, his wild curls framing a round, cherubic face. He clutched a blue water bottle plastered with rocket ship stickers, one silver with red flames streaking across it, the name Arthur scrawled in bold black letters. His grin, wide and gap-toothed, missing a front incisor, seemed to leap from the screen. Daniel leaned closer, his trained eyes narrowing as he memorized every detail. Unique constellation of stickers, the slant of the handwriting gnawing from years as a police chief, that such objects could unlock the mysteries of a missing child case. "That bottle," he murmured. "It's distinctive. If someone's seen it, they'll remember." The car rolled slowly through the neighborhood, tires whispering against the asphalt as the late afternoon sun stretched long, eerie shadows across trimmed lawns and silent sidewalks. Sophia pressed her nose to the window, her breath fogging the glass in little clouds as she scanned the world outside. With fierce determination, Julia's gaze darted from one side of the street to the other, her heart lurching at every flicker of movement, a cat darting between bushes, a leaf skittering in the breeze, each a cruel tease of hope. Suddenly, Sophia's voice pierced the tense silence. "Wait, stop the car," she cried, startling Julia and Daniel so sharply they flinched. "I see something blue by the curb over there." Daniel jerked the wheel, gravel crunching beneath the tires as he pulled over. 20 feet ahead, nestled in the overgrown grass beside the road, a flash of blue peeked out, half hidden by the lengthening shadows. Julia's breath hitched, a sharp gasp that sliced through her chest as they scrambled out of the car. Hope and terror wrestled in her wide eyes, her legs trembling beneath her as she stumbled forward. Sophia, nimble and quick, reached it first, her small finger pointing with uncontainable excitement. "Look, it's got the same rocket ship's silver one with the red flames." Daniel knelt, his movements deliberate and practiced, treating the object like fragile evidence. He lifted the bottle, the black Arthur Stark against the blue, the stickers in exact match to the photo. A faint slosh of water sounded as he tilted it, a sign it hadn't been abandoned long. Julia's hands flew to the bottle, clutching it so tightly her knuckles blanched, as if holding it could summon Oliver back to her. "This is his," she whispered, her voice splittering with raw emotion. "He had it this morning when I dropped him at school. I stood there, watching him walk through those doors, waving at me with that silly grin." Her words faltered, drowned by the flood of horrifying possibilities crashing through her mind. Was it here, so far from where he should be? Daniel's face hardened, the seasoned officer's mask slipping into place, his jaw tight with the gravity of what this meant. The bottle's resting place, miles from Oliver's usual path, hinted at something darker than a lost child wandering off. He placed a steady hand on Julia's shoulder, his grip firm yet gentle. "Julia," he said, his voice laced with quiet urgency, "we need to call this in now." Finding his bottle, he rechanges everything. With swift precision, he pulled out his phone, dialing the police department as Julia nodded numbly, tears pooling in her eyes. Sophia sidled closer, slipping a small arm around Julia's waist, a silent pillar of strength as Daniel spoke into the phone. "This is Chief Michael Anderson. We've got a possible child abduction, 5-year-old male, Oliver Hart, last seen at Franklin Elementary. We just found his water bottle abandoned on a street far from his normal route." The voice on the other end crackled through, casual and maddeningly slow. "Okay, Chief. We'll send someone when we can." Daniel's brow furrowed, disbelief flickering in his steady gaze. "This is a potential kidnapping. We need immediate backup and search support." A pause, then a hesitant reply. "Copy that. We're short-staffed, but we'll see what we can do." Daniel's voice sharpened, pressing harder. "This child's been missing for hours. We've got evidence suggesting foul play. This demands action now." The officer's tone remained oddly detached. "Understood, sir. We'll get to it soon." Something about the response gnawed at Daniel, a discordant note that rang false in his years of experience. He'd never heard such apathy in a missing child case. "Put me through to Lieutenant Sanders," he demanded. "Unavailable, sir. Captain Morris is in a meeting." Daniel's jaw clenched as he glanced at Julia, her face paling with every word she overheard. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. As the call ended, Julia sank to her knees beside the curb, the bottle cradled against her chest like a relic of her son. Her sobs broke free, raw and guttural, echoing down the empty street. Sophia knelt beside her, whispering soft reassurances, her young voice trembling with empathy. Daniel stood tall, his mind racing, piecing together the implications. The bottle wasn't just a clue, it was a warning. Justice, he knew, demanded relentless pursuit. But the department's lethargy suggested a deeper rot, a misuse of power that could cost Oliver his life. Every second mattered, and he vowed silently to unearth the truth, no matter who stood in his way. For Julia, for Oliver, the fight was only beginning. The air inside the cramped police cruiser felt thick, almost suffocating. As Daniel pressed the phone tighter against his ear, his thumb hovered over the microphone, muffling his voice as he glanced sidelong at Julia. "Has there been any friction between you and the other officers lately?" he asked, his tone low but edged with suspicion. Julia shifted in her seat, the leather creaking under her weight. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her uniform, betraying the unease bubbling beneath her composed exterior. "Some of them weren't thrilled when I turned in Officer Jenkins for misconduct last week," she admitted, her voice tight, as though each word scraped against her throat. She avoided Daniel's gaze, her eyes darting to the rain-streaked window instead, where the gray world outside blurred into a dismal smear. Daniel's brow furrowed, a shadow of doubt creeping into his mind. He could feel the weight of something unspoken pressing down on the conversation, something more than just petty departmental squabbles. He dialed another number, then another, reaching out to senior officers he'd known for years, men and women he'd trusted with his life. But each call was met with the same maddening resistance, vague excuses, clipped responses, or a deliberate slowness that gnawed at his patience. By the time he hung up the last call, his knuckles were white around the phone, and his jaw was set in a hard line. "They're stalling," he said, turning to Julia, his voice rough with frustration. "I don't know if it's politics or something darker, but they're dragging their feet, and we're running out of time." Julia's face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks as if someone had pulled a plug deep inside her. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled with a mix of fear and disbelief. "Are they really going to let some internal nonsense stop us from finding my son?" Her hands clenched into fists, nails digging into her palms as she fought to keep her composure. Daniel met her gaze, his own eyes burning with resolve. "Not if I have anything to say about it." he said firmly, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. "If they won't step up, we'll do it ourselves. I've got contacts in the next district, good people who owe me favors. We're not waiting around for anyone. Oliver's out there, and we're bringing him home." From the back seat, Sophia's small voice broke the heavy silence. She'd been sitting quietly, her knees drawn up to her chest, listening to every word with wide, attentive eyes. "Dad always says doing what's right matters more than sticking to the rules," she said, her tone soft but steady. Daniel glanced at her through the rearview mirror, a flicker of pride softening the hard lines of his face. "That's right, kiddo," he replied, nodding as her words bolstered his resolve. "If the department won't move, we will. Their inaction's wrong, but it won't stop us." Just then, a sharp buzz jolted Sophia upright. She fumbled in her pocket, pulling out her phone with a startled gasp. The screen glowed with an unfamiliar number, and her brow creased as she stared at it, her thumb hesitating over the answer button. After a beat, she pressed it to her ear. "Hello," she said, her voice small and uncertain. Almost instantly, her expression tightened, her breath catching as she listened. Her eyes flicked wildly between her father and Julia, panic rising like a tide. "Dad," she whispered, her hand shaking as she thrust the phone toward him. I think it's about Oliver." Daniel snatched the phone, his movements swift and decisive. "This is Police Chief Anderson," he barked, his voice a deep, commanding rumble. A distorted voice crackled through the speaker, oily and smug. Chief Anderson, I believe I have something, or rather, some enough that Officer Hart's been looking for." Julia's breath hitched audibly, her body leaning forward as if pulled by an invisible thread. Her hands gripped the edge of her seat, knuckles whitening as she strained to hear every word. "Where's my son?" Daniel demanded, his tone unshakable despite the storm brewing in his chest. "Oliver's perfectly safe," the voice replied, dripping with false reassurance. "He'll be back in his mother's arms on Harmadance. Officer Hart gives me what I want." Daniel's jaw clenched so hard it ached. "What do you want?" he pressed, each syllable sharp and deliberate. The voice chuckled, a low, grating sound that sent a shiver down Julia's spine. "Oh, I think Officer Hart knows exactly what I'm after. Don't you, officer?" Before Daniel could respond, Julia ripped the phone from his hand, her desperation spilling over. "Please," she pleaded, her voice raw and ragged. "Where's Oliver? What do you want from me?" The line crackled with silence for a heartbeat before the voice returned, colder now. "You know what I want. Deliver it, and your boy's yours again." Then, with a click, the call went dead. Julia stared at the blank screen, her hands trembling so violently the phone nearly slipped from her grasp. Her breaths came in shallow gasps, her mind a chaotic whirl of terror and guilt. Daniel didn't hesitate, grabbed his own phone and tried to trace the call, his fingers flying across the screen, but the effort was useless. The caller had masked their tracks too well. He turned to Julia, who had slumped back in her seat, her face ashen and her eyes hollow. "Julia," he said, his voice softening but still urgent, "we need to figure this out. Who could hold a grudge against you? Someone from a case, anyone who'd want something from you." She pressed her hands to her temples, her fingers digging into her scalp as if she could squeeze the answers out. Her mind raced, flipping through a mental catalog of arrests, complaints, and threats. Slowly, a flicker of realization sparked in her eyes, widening them with dread. "There might be someone," she murmured, her voice barely audible, as if speaking it aloud made it real. Daniel leaned closer, his gaze locked on hers with quiet intensity. "Tell me," he urged, his tone gentle but insistent. Julia swallowed hard, her throat dry as sandpaper. "2 weeks ago," she began, her words halting. "There was this guy Marcus Fletcher. We'd gotten calls about him for months, parents saying he'd been lurking around elementary schools. They'd seen him with toys, candy, trying to coax kids closer. Some swore he'd even asked kids to get into his car." Her voice wavered, and she hugged herself tightly, her arms a flimsy shield against the memory. "I caught him near Pine Grove Elementary. He had a backpack stuffed with teddy bears, and sweets of everything about him screamed danger." But she shook her head, frustration twisting her features. "We couldn't hold him. No hard evidence, just suspicions. We had to let him go." Daniel's expression darkened, his mind already piecing together the implications. "What happened after that?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Julia's eyes dropped to her lap, her hands wringing together. Before he walked out, he looked at Merritt in the ice and said something I'll never forget. He said no one could keep him from what he wanted, that people like me couldn't stop him forever. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. Without a word, Daniel pulled out his phone again, his fingers moving with practiced speed as he punched in Marcus James Fletcher's name. "Full name, any details you've got," he said, his tone clipped. "Marcus James Fletcher." Julia replied quickly, her words tumbling out. "40s, lives on the east side." I logged everything in my report of creepy detail, even though it wasn't enough to charge him. As Daniel tapped into the police database, Julia's composure frayed further. "What if it's him?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "What if he took Oliver to punish me? I knew he was a monster, but I couldn't prove it." The screen lit up with Fletcher's file, and Daniel's eyes narrowed as he scrolled through a string of complaints lurking near playgrounds, suspicious behavior around children known of which had stuck. He cross-checked recent activity, hunting for any thread that might tie Fletcher to Oliver's disappearance. "If it's him," he said, his voice a quiet vow, "we'll track him down. He's not getting away with this." Sophia, who'd been silent in the back, suddenly piped up, her voice cutting through the tension like a bell. "Dad," she said, her brow furrowed with sudden clarity, "I think I've seen someone like that at our park." Daniel whipped around, his heart thudding. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" he asked, his tone sharp with focus. Sophia's words spilled out faster now, her hands gesturing as she spoke. "There's this guy who shows up sometimes. He's white, kinda tall, always in this brown leather jacket even when it's hot. He's got messy gray hair, like he doesn't care about it. And he's always hanging around the little kids, not the big ones like me. I saw him 2 days ago." Julia's breath caught, her eyes locking onto Sophia's. "Gray hair, messy, brown jacket?" she asked, her voice trembling. Sophia nodded eagerly. "Yeah, and he's weird. He never brings kids of his own, doesn't talk to the adults, just watches the little ones. Sometimes he opens his backpack and shows them stuff." Julia's face went ghostly white, her hands flying to her mouth. "That's him," she choked out. "That's Marcus Fletcher. Same jacket, same creepy habits." She turned to Daniel, her eyes wild with terror. "He must have been stalking the park watching Oliver. The timing lines up." Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles paling as the pieces clicked into place. "If he was there 2 days ago, he could have been planning this, waiting for his chance," he said, his voice a low growl. Julia buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "This is my fault," she whispered, her words muffled but heavy with guilt. "He's after Oliver because I tried to stop him because I saw what he was and couldn't lock him up." "No," Daniel snapped, his tone firm but not harsh. He reached over, resting a steady hand on her shoulder. "This isn't on you. You did your job. You tried to protect those kids, including Oliver. Fletcher's the one who crossed the line, not you." His words carried the weight of a man who'd seen justice twisted too many times, who knew the cost of power abused. "We're going to find him, Julia. And when we do, he'll answer for this, not just to us, but to the law he thinks he can dodge." The rain outside drummed harder against the windshield, a relentless rhythm that matched the pounding of their hearts. In that moment, the lesson was clear. Justice wasn't just a badge or a rule book, it was a fight. A promise to right the wrongs when power turned predator. And for Julia, Daniel, and Sophia, it was a fight they'd wage until Oliver was safe, no matter who stood in their way. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on Marcus Fletcher as he slipped his phone back into his pocket, his fingers lingering on its edges for a moment as if reluctant to let go. His jaw tightened, a steely resolve flickering in his dark eyes. This was the breakthrough they'd been clawing for, a lifeline in the chaos. "This is exactly what we've been waiting for," he muttered under his breath, his voice low but brimming with conviction. "A solid lead. We've got a name, a face, and a fresh sighting to chase down, without hesitation." He pulled his phone out again, his movements sharp and deliberate, fueled by a surge of purpose. His thumb danced across the screen, punching in a number he hadn't dialed in months, one tied to memories of late-night stakeouts and bitter coffee. As the line rang, his heart thudded against his ribcage, a mix of anticipation and dread swirling in his chest. He could almost hear the gravelly timbre of the voice he was about to summon before it even answered. "Terry Robinson speaking," came the gruff, familiar greeting. Cutting through the static like a blade, Daniel straightened instinctively, his grip tightening on the phone. "Terry, it's Michael Anderson," he said, his tone steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I'm in deep here, and I need your help fast." Urgency laced every syllable, though he fought to keep his voice from cracking under the pressure. "We've got a child abduction on our hands, and I'm damn sure it ties back to a suspect you'd recognize in the back seat." Sophia's wide eyes tracked her father's every move, her small frame tense with a quiet intensity. Beside her, Julia sat stiff as a board, her breath shallow, hanging on to each word as if it were a lifeline pulling her son back from the abyss. "Tell me everything," Terry replied, his voice shifting instantly from casual to razor-sharp focus, the kind of tone that could command a room without raising its volume. Daniel didn't waste a second. "Marcus Fletcher," he began, painting the picture with quick, precise strokes. Julia arrested him a couple of years back, petty stuff that hinted at something darker. Then the threat started, phone calls, cryptic messages, all aimed at her. Now Oliver's gone, snatched right out of his routine. And the pieces fit too well with that park stalker case you ran last year, the one where the bastard kept slipping away because we couldn't pin him down. His words carried the weight of sleepless nights and endless dead ends, each detail a shard of glass in his throat. Terry's response was immediate, grim. "I remember it. To damn well. The patterns line up, some ghosting tactics, same taunting style. I can be there in an hour with my team and gear. You need someone who knows this game, Michael, and I'm your guy." Daniel pressed on, his mind racing ahead. "If this creep calls again, Terry, I want you on point. You've talked down monsters like this before. Your voice could be the difference between Oliver coming home or he didn't finish the thought. Couldn't bear to." "Smart call." Terry shot back. "No one engages until I'm there. We'll sync up, do this right. My crew's already rolling." Julia leaned forward, her knuckles white as she gripped the seat's edge, a flicker of hope igniting in her tired eyes. For weeks, she'd been drowning in guilt and terror, blaming herself for every choice that might have painted a target on her family. Hearing Terry Robinson, a name she'd only known through whispered legends of his grit and genius commit to their fight, felt like a crack of light piercing the suffocating dark. "Thank you, Terry," Daniel said, relief softening his tone for the first time in days. "We'll rendezvous at the station in 20. As he hung up, Daniel turned to Julia, catching the faint tremble in her hands. "Terry's the real deal," he assured her, his voice firm but warm. "If anyone can run Fletcher to ground, it's him. I've seen him unravel cases that looked like lost cause. I've heard the stories from cops twice my age about how he tracked a perp through a blizzard once. Just on instinct." Julia nodded, twisting her fingers together, her mind a battlefield of fear and fragile optimism. "Do you think he can really bring Oliver back?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the possibility. "He's got the tools, the know-how, and a stubborn streak a mile wide," Daniel replied, starting the engine with a decisive turn of the key. "He's cracked dozens of cases like this, and he thrives when the clock's ticking. With him on board, we're not just grasping at straws anymore." The car rumbled to life, and they sped toward the station, the promise of Terry's arrival fueling their resolve. 20 minutes later, the air in the cramped precinct room buzzed with tension, thick enough to choke on. Julia's phone shattered the silence, its shrill ring slicing through the hum of murmured strategies. Her hands shook as she glanced at the screen, recognizing the number that had haunted her nightmares. She shot a quick look at Daniel, then Terry, who just stormed in, his presence filling the space like a thunderclap. She pressed the phone to her ear. "Hello," her voice quivered despite her desperate grip on composure, a mother's plea wrapped in an officer's steel. Terry's fingers were already flying across his equipment, a tangle of wires and screens he'd hauled in with him. His eyes locked on the monitor, watching the signal bounce between towers, narrowing the net around their prey with every pulse. Officer Hart, the distorted voice sneered, dripping with malice that made Julia's skin crawl. "I trust you've had time to stew over your son's predicament." Daniel stepped closer, his broad shoulders a steady anchor beside her. He gave a subtle nod, urging her to keep the caller talking, buying Terry precious seconds. "Please," Julia said, her throat tightening as she forced the words out. "I'll do anything you want. Just don't hurt my boy." Her free hand clutched the desk, nails digging into the wood as if it could hold her together. "Anything." The voice sharpened, a blade twisting deeper. "Then listen close. You're done with the force. Resign today. Your badge, your career, all of it ends now. Or Oliver's the one who pays." Julia's breath hitched, her mind reeling. She'd bled for that badge, but it was nothing compared to the life on the line. "I understand." She choked out. "I'll do it. I'll resign right now. Just tell me he's okay." "Oh, he's finna for the moment," the caller taunted, savoring her desperation. "He's closer than you think. Whether he stays that way, that's on you, Officer Harder, should I say. Soon to be nobody." Daniel gestured frantically, mouthing "keep going," while Terry's focus never wavered, his equipment humming as it zeroed in. "Can I speak to him?" Julia pleaded, her voice breaking like glass. "I just need to hear he's alive." "You don't get to make demands," the caller snapped, venom lacing every word. "Submit that resignation, or this ends badly." The line cut off with a harsh click, leaving a void that swallowed the room whole. Julia lowered the phone, her hand trembling violently, tears brimming but unshed. Before despair could take root, Terry's gear beeped triumphantly. "Got it," he barked, his voice taut with adrenaline, signals pinging a spot just a few miles out. He scribbled coordinates on a scrap of paper, his handwriting jagged but sure. "My team's en route. We move now." Daniel and Julia locked eyes, a silent pact forged in shared determination. They were clasesso closeto, pulling Oliver from the jaws of this nightmare. The late afternoon sun stretched shadows across the road. As Daniel's car barreled toward the town's edge, Julia sat shotgun, her gaze fixed ahead, every muscle coiled like a spring. In the back, Sophia hugged her knees, her silence louder than any cry. A little girl carrying a weight no child should bear. The trace led them to a desolate stretch where civilization frayed into overgrown lots and sagging houses. Daniel's phone buzzed Terry's text, en route with tactical, ETA 5 minute. "Hold tight." They parked a block away, tucked behind a wall of wild bushes, the target house looming ahead. It was a dilapidated 2-story relic, paint peeling like old skin, windows boarded up tight. The yard was a jungle of weeds, a natural shield that could hide predator or prey. Julia's breath caught as she pointed to a dark sedan half buried in the overgrowth. "That's his," she whispered, her memory flashing to the day she'd cuffed Fletcher. His sneer burned into her mind. Minutes later, unmarked cars rolled in, silent as ghosts. Lights off. Terry stepped out, tactical vest snug over his broad frame, exuding a calm that steadied the chaos. He leaned into Daniel's window, voice low. "Teams are set to cover every exit. Daniel, take the back with 2 of mine. Julia, you're with me up front. Quick, smart, no mistakes." Daniel turned to Sophia, his heart twisting at her solemn nod. "Stay here, sweetheart. Lock the doors, only me or Terry, okay?" She agreed wordlessly, her trust in him absolute. The team fanned out, shadows among shadows, each step a calculated dance toward justiciar ruin. Julia checked her weapon, her hands unsteady, but her resolve ironclad. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a reckoning. Fletcher's abuse of power had torn her world apart, and now, with Terry's expertise and Daniel's unwavering support, the scales of justice might finally tip. Every second stretched into eternity, but they were ready to face the consequences, whatever they might be, to bring Oliver home. The air hung thick with resolve as Terry gathered his team under the dimming light of the late afternoon sky. His voice, steady yet charged with fierce determination, cut through the stillness as he delivered their final instructions. "Our mission revolves around one thing: Gulliver's safety. We move in smooth, silent, and disciplined. No one takes a step until I give the word." His words weren't just commands, they were a lifeline, tethering the group to their purpose. The team fanned out like shadows, each member slipping into their assigned positions around the weathered house, with a precision born of training and urgency. Daniel, broad-shouldered and resolute, led his small unit toward the rear, his boots pressing silently into the overgrown grass. Meanwhile, Julia stayed close to Terry near the front entrance, her sharp eyes catching fleeting glimpses of movement through an uncovered window silhouette, pacing restlessly inside, oblivious to the tightening net outside. Terry's hand hovered over his radio, his fingers steady despite the storm of anticipation brewing within him. He pressed the button and spoke in a hushed tone, barely louder than a breath. "All units in place. Hold for my signal." Beside him, Julia felt her chest tighten, her heart hammering against her ribs as if trying to break free. She forced herself to breathe, the stillness of the afternoon wrapping around them like a heavy cloak, amplifying the tension that pulsed through her veins. Every second stretched into eternity as they waited, poised on the edge of action. Earlier that day, the journey to this moment had begun with a slow, deliberate drive along a road that grew lonelier with each passing mile. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles whitening slightly as the city's edges faded into the rearview mirror. Julia sat beside him in the passenger seat, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap, her mind racing with thoughts of her son Oliver, her little boy, somewhere out there, scared and alone. In the back seat, Sophia, Daniel's teenage daughter, sat with her knees drawn up, her wide eyes tracing the wild, untamed landscape rushing past. The coordinates Terry had provided guided them deeper into isolation, where civilization surrendered to sprawling vegetation and the sun dipped low, casting jagged shadows across the cracked asphalt like skeletal hands reaching out from the earth. The silence inside the car was deafening, each occupant locked in their private turmoil. Daniel's jaw clenched as he navigated the desolate stretch, his calm exterior masking the fury simmering beneath Fury at the monster who had taken Oliver, at the helplessness that gnawed at him. Julia's thoughts spiraled, a chaotic whirl of fear and guilt. Had she missed some sign? Could she have protected him? Sophia, though young, felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She wasn't just a passenger, she was part of this fight, her sharp instincts honed by years of watching her father work. As the car rolled on, the absence of life in no other vehicles, no distant hum of humanity settled over them like a shroud, thickening the air with unspoken dread. Suddenly, Sophia's voice pierced the quiet, urgent yet soft. "Dad, look over there." She pressed her face closer to the window, her breath fogging the glass in small, fleeting bursts as she pointed toward a tangle of overgrown trees. Through the dense brush, the faint outline of an abandoned building emerged, its boarded windows and rusted metal doors sagging under the weight of neglect. Vines snaked up its crumbling walls, nature's slow conquest over a place long forgotten. Daniel eased the car to a stop, angling it behind a cluster of wild shrubs to keep them partially concealed. The three of them leaned forward, their gazes locked on the structure looming ahead, its eerie stillness sending a chill down Julia's spine. Daniel's trained eye scanned the scene, catching the subtle signs others might miss. The grass near the side in transite's flattened. He murmured, his voice low and measured. "Someone's been here, and not long ago." Julia's hands balled into fists, her nails digging into her palms as she stared at the building. "We have to be smart about this," she whispered, her voice taut with a mother's desperation. "If he's in there with Oliver, one wrong move she couldn't finish the thought. The image of her son in danger choking her words. Sophia's eyes darted between the gaps in the boards, searching for any hint of life. "I saw something," she said softly, her finger trembling as she pointed. "Just for a second." Through that crack, something moved. Daniel and Julia exchanged a glance, a silent pact forged in that fleeting moment. They couldn't act yet, not without Terry and the others. So they waited, the minutes crawling by with agonizing slowness. Julia's gaze never wavered from the building, her body rigid with a mix of hope and terror. Daniel's hands stayed firm on the wheel, his calm facade a shield for the readiness coiled within him. Sophia kept watch, her youthful determination shining through her quiet vigilance. When Terry's team finally arrived, their vehicles rolling up with hushed engines, the tension snapped into focus. Terry stepped out, his presence a steadying force amid the chaos of emotion swirling around them. He gathered the group close, his voice a whisper as he outlined their plan. Speed and silence, that's how we do this. We don't know how many are inside. But those kids come first. Oliver comes first. He handed out tactical gear flashlights, vests, tool-shy's movements brisk yet deliberate, every action underscoring the gravity of what lay ahead. The team moved toward the building in a tight formation, their steps muffled by the thick grass, their breaths shallow in the cooling evening air. At Terry's signal, 2 officers approached the rusted side door, their gloved hands testing the hinges with care. The door groaned faintly as it gave way, revealing a dark corridor cloaked in shadow. The air inside hit them like a wall, musty, stale, thick with the scent of decay. Flashlight beams sliced through the gloom, illuminating peeling wallpaper that curled like dead skin and floors littered with broken glass and splintered wood. Terry led the way, his posture rigid with purpose, while Julia followed close behind, her every nerve alight with the need to find her son. Daniel brought up the rear, his steady presence a quiet anchor for the team. A faint sound stopped them, cold as soft, trembling whimper echoing from deeper within. Terry's head snapped toward it, his eyes narrowing as he motioned the team forward. They wove through empty rooms and narrow hallways, the walls closing in around them, until they reached a locked door. With a nod from Terry, the officers breached it in one swift, coordinated motion. The flashlights swept the room, and Julia's heart seized at the sight before her, Oliver. Her little boy, curled in a corner, his wrists bound with coarse rope, his wide eyes glistening with unshed tears. Mama, his voice quavered, fragile and small, cutting through her like a blade. She rushed to him, collapsing to her knees as her shaking hands fumbled with the knots. I'm here, baby, she whispered, her voice breaking as she pulled him into her arms. You're safe now. I've got you. But as the lights danced across the room, a grim truth unfolded. Oliver wasn't alone. 7 other children, some barely old enough to speak, huddled in the shadows, their wrists tied, their clothes tattered and stained. Some stared blankly, hollowed out by fear, others sobbed quietly, their small bodies trembling. The sight ignited a fire in Daniel's chest, a righteous anger that fueled his every move as he worked with the team to free them. His hands gentle despite the rage burning within. Sophia lingered near the doorway, her young face etched with a mix of horror and resolve. She'd seen her father in action before, but this was different. These were kids, like her friends, like her. She stepped forward, kneeling beside a little girl with matted hair, whispering, "It's okay now. We're here to help." Her voice, soft but steady, carried a strength beyond her years. Terry kept his composure, though his eyes betrayed the storm and relief, fury, sorrow all warring beneath his professional mask. He directed the team with clipped commands, ensuring every inch of the building was scoured. The officers moved like a well-oiled machine, their lights probing every corner, determined to root out any lingering threat. Then, a sharp creak shattered the silencing sound of a door swinging open, followed by the frantic patter of footsteps. Terry's hand shot up, his voice a fierce whisper, "Back exit no." 2 officers bolted down the corridor, their movements swift and sure, cutting off the escape route with lethal precision. The kidnapper, a weary, middle-aged man cloaked in dark clothes, burst through the rear door, only to freeze as he met the barrels of their weapons. His eyes, wild with panic, darted between them, a trapped animal realizing the hunt was over. Terry stepped forward, his voice cold and unyielding. "It's done. You don't get to hurt them anymore." In that moment, justice wasn't just an idea, it was a reckoning. The children, freed from their bonds, were living proof of the consequences that follow when power is twisted into cruelty. For Julia, holding Oliver as he clung to her, it was a vow fulfilled. For Daniel, it was a reminder of why he fought. And for Terry, watching the man who'd preyed on the innocent be led away, it was a lesson etched in stone. Abuse power, and the shadows will rise to claim you. The moment he realized escape was no longer an option, a jolt of panic surged through his chest. He pivoted on his heel, legs pumping furiously as he tried to flee into the shadows. But the officers were a blur of motion, closing in with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Before he could gain any ground, their hands clamped onto him, dragging him down to the cold, unforgiving earth. His body hit the dirt with a dull thud, and a cloud of dust rose around him as he thrashed, desperation fueling his every move. "Stay still," one officer barked, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Sharp and commanding, with swift, practiced movements, they wrestled his arms behind his back, the metallic snap of handcuffs locking into place reverberating through the air. A sound that felt final, like the closing of a heavy door. He fought for a fleeting moment, muscles straining against the iron grip of his captors. But Terry and his team were relentless. Their faces were set with grim determination, each movement deliberate as they pinned him down, snuffing out his resistance like a flame under a damp cloth. His breaths came in ragged gasps, his mind racing with the realization that this was the end of the line. From a distance, in the dimly lit sanctuary of the main room, Julia stood clutching Oliver to her chest, her arms a protective cocoon around her trembling son. The boy's small hands gripped the fabric of her uniform with a ferocity that belied his size, his knuckles pale from the effort, his wide, frightened eyes locked onto the man who had stolen him from his world. And for a split second, their gazes collided, delivers brimming with terror, the kidnappers with a cold, unyielding defiance. Unable to bear the sight any longer, Oliver buried his face into his mother's shoulder, his body quaking with silent sobs. Julia's heart twisted painfully as she felt the dampness of his tears seep through her shirt. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her own emotions. "He can't hurt you anymore. You're safe now, I promise." Her hand moved gently through his tousled hair, each stroke an attempt to erase the horrors he'd endured. She could feel his racing pulse gradually ease beneath her touch, as though her words were a lifeline pulling him back from the abyss. The officers hauled the kidnapper upright, his identity confirmed with a curt nod from Terry, whose face darkened with recognition. This wasn't the first time he'd crossed paths with this man. His name was etched into the files of too many abduction cases, a specter haunting Terry's career. The kidnapper's earlier fire had fizzled into a hollow resignation, his shoulders slumping as he stared at the floor, defeated. Julia's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, still cradling Oliver as though letting go might unravel the fragile peace they'd reclaimed. Tears carved glistening trails down her cheeks, mirroring the ones streaming from her son's eyes. For the first time since his rescue, they held each other fully, unburdened by the looming threat. Oliver's tiny arms snaked around her neck, clinging to her as if she were his anchor in a storm. His cries broke free at last, raw and unrestrained, a flood of fear and relief spilling out in shuddering sobs. "Mama, Mama," he choked out, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "I was so scared." Her own tears fell unchecked as she pressed her lips to his forehead. "I know, baby, I know. But you were so so incredibly brave. You're safe now, and I'm never letting you go again." Daniel stood nearby, his broad shoulders relaxing as the tension of the operation melted away. Relief softened the hard lines of his face as he watched mother and son reunite, the culmination of their painstaking efforts unfolding before him. Terry, ever the steady hand, directed his team with quiet efficiency, ensuring the kidnapper was secured in the back of a patrol car, his every move watched by hawk-eyed officers. Meanwhile, others turned their attention to the group of rescued children huddled together in a corner, their wide eyes tracking the kidnapper's departure. The officers approached them with care, crouching low to offer gentle words and warm smiles, promising a return to the families they'd been torn from. Outside, the abandoned building loomed like a silent witness, its cracked walls bathed in the pulsing glow of red and blue emergency lights. Slicing through the twilight, the scene transformed rapidly as officers scrambled to create a makeshift reunion area. Tables and chairs were dragged into place, their metal legs scraping against the pavement, while medics prepared to assess the children's conditions. Each young survivor stayed close to an officer, tiny hands often fisting the fabric of their uniforms, seeking comfort in the presence of their protectors. Word of the rescue spread like wildfire through the community, and within minutes, the first wave of parents arrived. Tires screeched as cars jolted to a stop, doors flung open before engines even quieted. Frantic mothers and fathers spilled out, their faces etched with a desperate hope as they scanned the crowd for their lost children. The air thickened with emotion as reunions began. His mother spotted him first, her voice breaking as she screamed his name, Tommy. "Oh God, Tommy." The boy's face crumpled at the sight of her, and he bolted forward, launching himself into her arms with a sob that echoed through the night. One by one, similar scenes unfolded, each more heart-wrenching than the last. The air buzzed with cries of relief and joy, parents clutching their children as though they might vanish again if they loosened their grip. Daniel and Terry wove through the throng, offering updates and steady reassurances. The suspects in custody, Daniel told a cluster of parents, his voice calm but firm. "He won't hurt anyone else, I give you my word." Nearby, medics worked with quiet urgency, checking the children for injuries, mostly dehydration and exhaustion. One paramedic reported to Terry, wiping sweat from his brow. "They'll need time to recover, but physically, they'll pull through." Officers moved among the families, notebooks in hand, collecting whispered statements from the children, some barely audible, others punctuated by tears, each word a brick in the case against their tormentor. Julia sat on a weathered bench, Oliver still nestled in her lap, his breathing now a steady rhythm against her chest. She watched the reunions unfold, her heart swelling with a bittersweet understanding she'd never known before. These parents higher relief, their gratitude emerged her own, binding them in an unspoken bond forged by shared pain and triumph. Terry oversaw the final details, ensuring each child was identified and documented before leaving with their families. His calm exterior belied the storm of emotions in his eyes: pride, exhaustion, and a quiet sorrow for what these children had endured. Parents showered the officers with gratitude, their voices trembling as they clasped hands and offered tearful hugs. Thank you so much," one father said, his voice breaking. "We thought we'd lost her forever." As the last family prepared to depart, Julia caught Daniel's gaze across the chaotic scene. Her eyes shimmered with a gratitude too deep for words, a silent acknowledgement of his unwavering resolve in bringing Oliver back to her. He dipped his head in response, a faint smile tugging at his lips as the final threads of their harrowing mission wove together. Weeks later, the courtroom hummed with a restless energy, its benches packed with the families of the rescued children. Julia, Daniel, and Terry sat shoulder to shoulder in the front row, their faces carved with a steely resolve. Across the room, the kidnapper slumped at the defendant's table, his posture rigid, his eyes smoldering with a bitter resentment that swept over the crowd like a venomous wind. Judge Martha Reynolds adjusted her glasses with deliberate care, her throat clearing like a gavel's echo, silencing the room. "The crimes you've committed," she began, her voice steady and unyielding, "demonstrate a profound contempt for human life and dignity. The scars you've left on these innocent children and their families' emotional wounds, that may never fully heal her beyond measure." The kidnapper's jaw tightened, his gaze flickering between Julia and the officers, his hands clenching the table's edge until his knuckles gleamed white. "Given the gravity and sheer number of your offenses," Judge Reynolds continued, "this court sentences you to 50 years in prison, with no possibility of parole." A wave of relief washed through the room, parents embracing one another, some brushing away tears of vindication. Daniel rested a steadying hand on Julia's shoulder as two officers stepped forward to escort the prisoner away. But then, in a sudden burst of fury, the kidnapper lunged forward, his face twisting into a mask of rage. "This isn't over," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom as he fixed his glare on Julia. "When I get out, I'm coming for all of your kids so you'll see what it's like to lose everything." Julia rose to her feet, her heart pounding, but her stance unwavering, meeting his hatred with a quiet strength. Daniel and Terry flanked her instantly, their presence a silent bulwark against his threats. He continued to shout as the officers dragged him toward the exit, his voice ricocheting off the walls. "You think you're safe, you think this ends here. I'll find the meal, make you all pay." The heavy courtroom doors swung shut behind him, muffling his tirade, but the echo lingered like a dark promise. The three officers exchanged a glance, no words needed to convey the weight of their shared victory and the lessons it carried. Justice had prevailed, but at a cost, its triumph tempered by the reminder of power's corrupting potential. The kidnapper's downfall was a stark warning. Those who wield authority to harm will face consequences as unrelenting as the law itself. Together, they stepped into the light of a new day, carrying the strength of their unity and the hope of healing ahead. The air was thick with anticipation as Daniel, Julia, and Terry moved together toward the courthouse exit, their footsteps echoing in perfect harmony on the polished tile floor. Each stride carried them further from the suffocating weight of the kidnappers' menacing threats, a dark chapter they were eager to leave behind. Outside, the world felt lighter, the sun casting a golden glow over the town, as if nature itself was celebrating their victory. Inside the police station's grand hall, a transformation had taken place. What was once a utilitarian space now brimmed with life rows of wooden chairs, stretched across the room, occupied by families buzzing with pride and relief. Officers stood tall in their freshly pressed uniforms, badges gleaming under the sunlight that poured through the towering windows, illuminating the medals soon to be draped around their necks. The atmosphere hummed with a quiet reverence, a shared understanding of the triumph they were about to honor. At the front of the room, Daniel, Julia, and Terry stood side by side, their shoulders squared yet softened by a rare moment of calm. They exchanged fleeting glances, their eyes reflecting a mosaic of emotions: exhaustion from the relentless search, elation from the rescue, and a quiet bond forged in the crucible of those harrowing days. Daniel's chest tightened as he recalled the sleepless nights, the gnawing fear for his daughter Sophia and the other missing children, and the surge of hope when they finally brought them home. Julia's lips curved into a faint smile, her mind drifting to the chaotic blur of the operation, the way her heart had pounded as they breached the kidnappers' hideout. Terry, ever steady, gave a subtle nod, his calm demeanor a rock for them all. Behind them, the rest of the tactical team lined up, their faces etched with a mix of fatigue and fulfillment. These were men and women who had stared into the abyss and emerged victorious, their pride radiating like the sunlight glinting off their badges. Police Chief Johnson stepped up to the podium, his broad frame commanding the room as his deep voice cut through the murmurs. Today, he began, his tone resonant and unwavering. We gather to celebrate the extraordinary courage and unshakable dedication of our officers during the recent child rescue operation. Their relentless commitment to safeguarding the children of this community sets the gold standard for what law enforcement should be. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. As he called each officer forward, the room erupted in warm applause, a wave of gratitude washing over the hall. Terry and his team were the first to be recognized, their flawless execution of the rescue plan earning them a thunderous ovation. Terry accepted his medal with a quiet dignity, his thoughts drifting to the meticulous planning, the sleepless hours strategizing, and the split-second decisions that had saved lives. Julia stepped forward next, her heart racing as she felt the weight of the medal settle against her chest. She stood taller than she had in weeks, her posture radiating a newfound confidence. The applause enveloped her like an embrace, a stark contrast to the self-doubt that had plagued her after her earlier misstep with Sophia. She could feel the eyes of her colleagues, their respect and support lifting her up, cleansing the lingering shame of her mistake. Then, Chief Johnson's voice softened, a rare tenderness breaking through his authoritative demeanor. "We have one more person to honor today," he said, his gaze shifting to the audience. "Someone whose sharp instincts and fearless heart cracked this case wide open. Sophia Anderson, would you please come forward?" A hush fell over the room as Sophia rose from her seat beside her father, her cheeks flushed a soft pink, a mixture of embarrassment and pride swirling within her as she took careful, deliberate steps toward the front. The crowd watched in awe with a small girl, no older than 10, walking with a quiet grace that belied her age. Chief Johnson knelt slightly, presenting her with a vibrant collection of books and toys, their bright colors a stark contrast to the somber uniforms around her, along with a framed certificate emblazoned with her name. Sophia's fingers brushed the frame, her shy smile lighting up her face as she murmured a soft thank you. Daniel watched from the front row, his throat tightening with emotion. His little girl, so brave and perceptive, stood before them all, a beacon of hope amidst the storm they'd weathered together. His pride swelled until it felt like his chest might burst, a father's love mingling with admiration for the child who had changed everything. One by one, the families of the rescued children approached, their gratitude spilling over in tearful embraces and heartfelt words. A mother clutched Julia's hands, her voice trembling as she whispered, "You brought my baby back to me." An older brother, barely out of his teens, clapped Terry on the shoulder, his eyes shining with unspoken thanks. Arthur, a boy with tousled brown hair, clung to his mother's hand as they neared Sophia. He offered a timid wave, his small fingers wiggling in the air, and Sophia returned it with a grin that lit up the room, a silent pact of friendship born from their shared ordeal. Julia stood among her colleagues, accepting the family's thanks with a quiet grace. The memory of her earlier era, her rash judgment of Sophia in the park, felt like a distant echo now, drowned out by the certainty that she had played a part in reuniting these families. Terry rested a steady hand on her shoulder, his silent nod a testament to the growth he'd witnessed in her, a journey from doubt to redemption. The ceremony stretched on, a cascade of awards and recognition filling the hall with warmth and relief. Laughter mingled with the clink of medals, and the air buzzed with a sense of closure. Across the room, Daniel caught Sophia's eye, and they shared a smile that spoke volumes. Their bond, already unbreakable, had deepened through their shared fight for justice. But for Julia, the day wasn't over. Hours later, she found herself perched on the edge of a chair in Supervisor Matthews' office, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Morning sunlight streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the desk, but it did little to thaw the icy knot of dread in her stomach. Matthews shuffled through a stack of papers, his stern expression softened only slightly by the respect he held for her recent heroism. "Officer Hart," he began, his voice firm yet measured, "your actions in the kidnapping case were nothing short of commendable. But we can't ignore what happened with Chief Anderson's daughter, Sophia." Julia swallowed hard, her throat constricting as she met his gaze. "I understand, sir," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of guilt raging inside her. "I take full responsibility for what I did that day." She could still see it, Park, the panic, the way she'd let her assumptions cloud her judgment, accusing Sophia without evidence. It had been a mistake born of fear, but that didn't lessen its sting. Matthews leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed in thought. "Given the gravity of the incident," he said, "I believe a suspension is warranted." A sharp knock at the door cut him off, and Daniel Anderson stepped into the room, his presence filling the space with an unspoken authority. "Supervisor Matthews," he said, his tone calm but resolute, "may I have a word?" Matthews nodded, gesturing for him to enter, and Daniel crossed the threshold, his shoulders squared with purpose. "I understand you're reviewing Officer Hart's conduct," he said, his eyes flicking briefly to Julia. "I'd like to speak on her behalf." Julia's breath caught, her heart pounding as Daniel continued. "During the kidnapping case, Officer Hart showed remarkable dedication to this community. She pushed past her own fears, working tirelessly to save not just my son, but every missing child." His voice softened, carrying a weight of sincerity. "Both Sophia and I have forgiven her actions. She's proven she can learn from her mistakes and grow into the officer this force needs." Julia sat frozen, her chest tightening with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. She hadn't expected this from Daniel, not after everything. Matthews listened intently, his fingers steepled as Daniel recounted Julia's tireless efforts, her humility in facing her errors, and the quiet strength she'd shown in the aftermath. "Chief Anderson," Matthews said at last, "your perspective means a great deal. If you and your daughter believe so strongly in Officer Hart's character." He turned to Julia, his gaze thoughtful. "Perhaps suspension isn't the right course." Relief flooded through her, warm and overwhelming. As he continued, "But let me be clear, Officer Hartrust is the bedrock of our work. This is your second chance. Don't waste it." "Thank you, sir," Julia replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I won't let you down." As they left the office, she turned to Daniel, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Your support means more than I can ever express." Later, beneath the lengthening shadows of the afternoon sun, Julia approached Daniel and Sophia in the police station parking lot. Her steps were slow, deliberate, each one heavy with the weight of what she needed to say. She stopped before them, her expression earnest, and knelt to meet Sophia's gaze. The girl's warm, understanding smile pierced through her, a pang of gratitude mingling with regret. "I wanted to thank you both properly," Julia said, her voice soft but firm. "And Sophia, I need to apologize again for what happened that day in the park." Her hands clasped together, trembling slightly as she spoke. "I made awful assumptions, and I was so wrong. What happened taught me a lesson I'll carry forever about justice, about compassion, about not letting power blind me to the truth." Sophia's smile never wavered, her young face radiating a kindness that seemed to stretch beyond her years. There was no bitterness, only a quiet strength that humbled Julia further. "Both of you helped me find my son when you had every reason to turn away," Julia continued, her eyes moving between father and daughter. "That changed me. It showed me what this job should be, protecting people, not judging them." Daniel rested a hand on Sophia's shoulder, his voice steady. "We're glad Arthur is safe," he said, "and we're grateful you've taken this to heart." Julia's voice caught as she pressed on. "When Arthur was missing, I felt that terror, that helplessness. I know now what it means to need compassion. I promise you Bathy'll never forget this. I'll be a better officer because of it." Sophia nodded, her small gesture carrying the weight of understanding. In that moment, the lesson crystallized for Julia. Justice wasn't just about enforcing the law, it was about humanity, about accountability, and the consequences of abusing power, even unintentionally, rippled far beyond the act itself. She rose to her feet, the sun dipping lower on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the trio. They stood together, united by a shared redemption, a testament to the power of growth and the enduring strength of a community that refused to let darkness prevail. The late afternoon sun dipped low, casting a warm golden glow over the parking lot where Julia stood beside Daniel, the air thick with the weight of what had just transpired. A gentle breeze tugged at the edges of her uniform, but it couldn't shake the heaviness that had settled in her chest for weeks until now. Her eyes, still stinging with the threat of tears, shimmered as she replayed the young girl's words in her mind. "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is learning from them." Sophia's simple, unflinching wisdom had cut through the storm of guilt Julia had been carrying, a storm that had brewed ever since she'd faltered in her duty. She turned to the girl's father, Chief Anderson, Daniela's steady presence a quiet anchor in the chaos of her emotions. "Thank you, Sophia," she said, her voice trembling with gratitude, "and thank you, Chief, for standing by me in that meeting today. I didn't deserve it." Daniel's gaze softened, his weathered face creasing with a faint smile. "You showed real courage owning up to it, Julia. That's what counts." For the first time in days, she felt the suffocating burden lift, replaced by a flicker of a renewed vow to honor the badge she wore. Later that day, the two found themselves in Julia's living room, where the soft hum of the world outside filtered through cream-colored curtains. The golden light of the afternoon spilled across the hardwood floor, illuminating the space with a tender warmth. Julia sat on the edge of her worn leather couch, cradling a steaming mug of coffee between her hands. The heat seeped into her palms, but it couldn't fully thaw the chill of worry that gripped her heart. Her eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, where the door to Arthur's room stood shut, a silent barrier between her and her son. She took a shaky breath, her voice low and laden with a mother's quiet despair. "I'm so worried about him, Daniel. Ever since the incident, he's barely left that room. He won't go to school most days, and when he does, he's a ghost, just sits there, not talking to anyone." Daniel leaned forward in the armchair across from her, his elbows resting on his knees, his dark eyes locked on hers with unwavering attention. She pressed on, her words tumbling out faster now, as if saying them aloud might lighten their weight. "The therapist keeps saying it's normal after something like that, and I get it, trauma takes time. But he's all alone in this. He's an only child, and right now, he needs someone who gets it. Someone his age who can make him feel safe again." She paused, her fingers tightening around the mug as a fragile hope sparked within her. Her gaze lifted to meet Daniel's. "Your daughter, Sophia, is so brave, so kind. Do you think maybe?" She trailed off, hesitant to overstep, her brows knitting with uncertainty. Daniel's nod was slow, encouraging, a silent nudge for her to continue. "You're thinking Sophia could help Arthur open up?" he asked, his tone warm and steady. Relief washed over Julia, softening the tension in her shoulders. "Yes," she breathed. "She's got this gentle way about her. I just thought, maybe if he spent some time with her." A few days later, the local park buzzed faintly with the sounds of distant laughter and the creak of playground equipment swaying in the breeze. The slides and swings stood vibrant against the green expanses, blues and yellows gleaming under the midday sun, but Arthur paid them no mind. He clung to Julia's side, his small hand gripping hers so tightly she could feel the tremor in his fingers. His sneakers scuffed the dirt as he stared at the ground, his dark hair falling over eyes that refused to meet the world. Julia's heart ached as she watched him, her chest tight with the helpless love of a mother who couldn't reach her child. Then Sophia appeared, stepping across the grass with Daniel trailing a few paces behind. Her bright yellow t-shirt glowed like a beacon, and a small backpack bounced lightly against her shoulders. She moved with a quiet confidence, her steps deliberate but unhurried, and when she reached Arthur, she offered him a smile that carried no expectation, just warmth. "Hi, Arthur," she said, her voice soft as the rustling leaves overhead. "I brought some of my favorite games. Want to see them?" He peeked up at her for a fleeting moment, then dropped his gaze back to his shoes, his fingers still locked around Julia's. But after a beat, he gave the tiniest nod, so small it might have been missed if Sophia hadn't been watching for it. She sank onto the grass nearby, folding her legs beneath her, and unzipped her backpack with care. Out came a deck of cards, each one adorned with colorful animals. As she began arranging them in a neat pattern, humming a quiet tune as she worked, Arthur's eyes flicked toward her, curiosity tugging at the edges of his fear. Minutes passed, and slowly, his grip on Julia's hand loosened. He took a hesitant step forward, then another, drawn in by the calm rhythm of Sophia's movements. "Do you like animals?" Sophia asked, her tone light and casual, her fingers stilling over a card as she kept her focus on the game. Another nod from Arthur, this one more certain. "I like tigers," he whispered, his voice so faint it nearly dissolved into the breeze. Sophia's face brightened, her eyes sparkling with delight. "Really? I've got a tiger card right here." She held it up, and Arthur edged closer, his small frame hovering just above the grass. Then, as if testing the waters, he lowered himself to sit near her, his knees tucked up tight. Sophia slid the cards toward him, showing him how to match the pairs, her hands moving with a steady patience that seemed to soothe him. His shoulders, once hunched and rigid, began to ease as they played. When he flipped over to penguin cards and saw they matched, a tiny smile broke across his face, fragile but real. Sophia let out a soft yay, clapping her hands together, and Arthur ducked his head, shy but still smiling, the first crack of light piercing the darkness that had shrouded him. Weeks later, high in the branches of an old oak tree, Sophia's treehouse stood as a sanctuary of childhood wonder. Her father had built it years ago, hammering each plank with care, and now it was a haven of colorful cushions and soft blankets that spilled across the wooden floor. Sunlight streamed through the small, crooked windows, painting shifting patterns on the walls as the two children sat surrounded by scattered board games. The air smelled faintly of cedar and summer, a comforting cocoon for their growing bond. "Want to try the harder puzzle today?" Sophia asked, tugging a 500-piece box from a stack, its cover splashed with leaping dolphins. Arthur, no longer the timid boy who could barely muster a word, nodded eagerly, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Yes, but can you help me with the edge pieces like last time?" he asked, his voice stronger now, carrying a hint of excitement. Sophia grinned, her freckled cheeks dimpling. "Of course, it's what big sisters are for." The word sister lit up Arthur's face, a beam of pure joy spreading across it, and for a moment, the treehouse felt like the safest place in the world. Over the months that followed, their friendship wove itself into the fabric of their lives, blooming in quiet corners and vibrant spaces alike. At the park, Sophia became Arthur's fearless guide, coaxing him up the towering slide he'd once avoided. She climbed beside him, her hands steady in his as they slid down together, his laughter ringing out a sound Julia hadn't heard in far too long. At home, they sprawled across the living room floor, building pillow forts with meticulous care. their imaginations turning cushions into castle walls and blankets into treasure maps. Julia watched from the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a mug in hand, her heart stitching itself back together with every giggle that echoed through the house. Arthur was changing furling like a flower after a long winter. He ventured out more, his steps surer, his words bolder. At school, his teachers marveled at the shift. The boy who once shrank into the background now raised his hand, joined a wildlife project, and even volunteered to speak first during a class presentation, his voice steady as he talked about cheetahs and their speed. For Julia, the transformation was nothing short of a miracle, and she knew who to thank. Sophia, with her boundless compassion and quiet strength, had reached into Arthur's world and pulled him back into the light. The two children, tethered by shared moments and an unspoken understanding, had become inseparable, proof that even the deepest wounds could mend with time, care, and a friend who refused to give up. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the park in hues of amber and rose, Julia and Daniel stood side by side, watching Sophia and Arthur chase each other across the grass. Their laughter danced through the air, a melody of resilience and joy. Julia turned to Daniel, her eyes glistening with emotion too vast to contain. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice thick with the gratitude of a mother who'd watched her son come alive again. Daniel glanced at her, his own pride swelling as he watched his daughter. "It was Sophia," he said simply. "She's always had a heart for lifting others up." As they lingered there, the fading light wrapping around them, the scene spoke of more than just a friendship forged in hardship. It was a lesson etched into the quiet spaces between them. Justice wasn't only about punishment or power, it was about accountability, about facing mistakes with courage and learning from them. Julia had stumbled, her lapse as an officer haunting her, but in owning it, she'd found redemption. And in the shadow of that lesson stood another, the abuse of power, the failure to protect, left scars on Arthur, on her, on the trust she'd once taken for granted. Yet here, in the laughter of two children and the bond that had grown between their families, was the promise of healing. The simplest acts of Sophia's kindness, Daniel's support that rebuilt what was broken, proving that compassion could light the way forward, even through the darkest nights.